Well, this is quite bright.
It is.
Sorry, it's a bit maybe too much. We should go for dark mode. Yeah, just to remark what Sean said. So thank you all for having us here. I think this is a great opportunity to strengthen the relationship. I have, I'm really pressured to have known before Professor Minghui, Thierry, Yehui, Kao King, and many other in the community from OpenEuler. So thank you all for your time today. And it's absolutely pleasure to be here, basically. So well, Yehui proposed basically this title. And I said, sounds good to me in the sense of, can we have an open discussion about tools and techniques to analyze open source projects? The only remark I would like to do is that perhaps we are now moving into a new world of not working at the level of projects, but working at the level of ecosystems. So if we think about OpenEuler in OSS components analysis, there are like 10,000 different repositories. So we are working at the level of a big scale. If we think about ecosystem, and this is some discussion that we are having internally in CHAOSS as well, it's not enough to work at the level of projects. So it's not enough to go to Kubernetes, for instance. You mentioned Kubernetes, right? But there are literally dozens of distributions of Kubernetes, for instance, OpenShift. So the ecosystem of Kubernetes is of Kubernetes plus all the distributions and commercial services around this, and basically all the dependencies that we have in the project, and the whole CNCF ecosystem. So that's what I mean by ecosystem. Basically, not only open source projects or dependencies, but all the commercial, individuals, profit and non-profit organizations that are around. The good thing about open source is that everything is open, and whatever is being produced can be easily tracked. Basically, we can trace everything what is happening. So we can go to how developers are working. We can go and see how companies are interacting with each other, right? So then the discussion for today is not going to be really technical. I'll go into details for architecture and so on of GrimoireLab, and then Sean, if you want to jump on Ogre, would be great as well. But it's more about having this high-level discussion of things. Just about me, thank you for the introduction. So yes, CEO of Bitergia, board member of CHAOSS. I'm the president of the Inner Source Commons Foundation. I'm a proud father of a 18 months little boy, which is running around, standing up and telling things. So yeah, it's great. So he's saying hello from Spain. Yeah, so first of all, tools and techniques. So if we think about tools and techniques, probably the very first thing that I thought about this presentation is, okay, yeah, the question makes sense, but what is the purpose of the tool? So are we trying to scale a lot? So for instance, do we want to analyze all the Git and GitHub and GitLab ecosystems? Those are thousands and thousands and thousands of developers, basically, and commits and activity there. So if you think about how to gather information from those data sources, we need to think in a different way than if you are thinking of going to a GitHub organization. So basically the scale, right, is a different order of magnitude. So my question would be, from this perspective, what is the mission of the project? So basically, what we are trying to achieve? And it's quite important to define the constraints of the project. So basically, we are an open source project that is willing to do A, B, C. And that's it. Because if you expand the definition, basically you are bringing complexity to the discussion. So for instance, OSS Compass. OSS Compass is a great tool that is supporting metrics models, that is working at certain scale, and then because of that scale, there are certain architectural decisions that were made just to make that work, basically. So scale to be able to gather all of this data in with certain performance, right, in certain time. So what does OSS Compass do? So OSS Compass does metrics models from CHAOSS in addition to other metrics, and then scale really good for certain sizes, for instance, 10,000 repositories that we have for OpenEuler. Good. And then what does the project not do? So probably OSS Compass is not interested in gathering or going into the detail for the really thin granularity of developers. Because basically you need to decide, you go to the one side or the other. Because if not, it's basically quite hard to go into both parts. So I'm one of the original developers of GrimoireLab, which is one of the founders, let's say, of CHAOSS project. So in our case, our purpose is slightly different here, right? So then just to close this first part on purpose, basically what I mean is that the purpose and the constraints that around this purpose basically is giving you, or giving us, all the, let's see, technical rationale on or direction on the architecture that we should be using. And that's basically driven by the mission. This is kind of defining requirements, and based on the requirements, you decide on the technical path that you are following, right? So this is what I mean by purpose. So we need to have a purpose in life, of course, and then specifically here. So let's go with some examples. So example one, we want to have open source tools to analyze open source projects. Great. So we want to have high scalability capabilities. We want to focus on well-established APIs as GitHub, GitLab or so. We want to focus on recent year of activity. We don't want to go back history, like 25 years. Maybe we don't care about unusual data sources. For instance, we don't go and analyze, I don't know, WeChat, or maybe we don't want to go and analyze Slack or others, but we want to go for certain activity as development activity, right? So big data focus, we are looking for trends. This is kind of the purpose of one example. An example two might be slightly different. So perhaps we are really interested in having heavy reproducibility capabilities. We want to go for certain modularity, following a certain Unix philosophy, having really small tools, doing really great work, each of them, having persistency on historical data, incrementality, completeness. So there are slightly different requirements, right? We may have another example, which is, again, open source tools to analyze open source projects. Maybe we want to have ML AI focus, apply certain machine learning capabilities, produce or be part of a data lake bigger than others. We want to perhaps focus on certain years of activity, and perhaps we are not that worried on, oh, that's a typo, sorry about that. We are not that worried on data completeness. So there are different requirements that we are interested in. Specifically, the example and the real life example I can bring here today is GrimoireLab, which is these requirements. Okay, so we wanted to have heavy reproducibility capabilities. Why? Because we come from academia. So in academia, it's quite important in empirical software engineering to be able to reproduce what you are doing. And that means many things. How you're extracting the data, the tools you're using, the version you're using, the repositories you're using, main stuff, right? Modularity, And then, because we are based in Europe, we need to be GDPR ready. So if you're aware of GDPR, is a way that you need to comply with the law in Europe about taking care of personal data and how people can opt in, opt out, and basically not use the data for marketing purposes. Okay. And well, there is a long list of supported data sources, because in GrimoireLab we were interested in supporting not the usual ones, but going beyond that. So we are giving support to, for instance, now we are working with, or we used to work with Mozilla Foundation. So then they have really specific and special data sources. So we want to enter into that analysis. So then this is the purpose. This is the GrimoireLab purpose. These are all the general requirements, first step requirements. Good. So then, because of this purpose, we have this architecture. So we have really small tools. So we have tools as Percival, which is expert in gathering data from all of these different data sources, 30 plus different data sources. And then you can run this literally by command line interface. What you have is, you call an API, you get a JSON document. That's it. It's easy, and it's always the same behavior. You call an API, you call a log, you call an mbox file, you call whatever, and then you get a JSON document. That's it. So it's you know the input, you know the output, then you know the tool, and then the rest with the rest of the tools, they work in a similar way. Persistency. I mentioned persistency before. We need a database. Okay, so for database, in this case, we are using Elasticsearch for OpenSearch, because Elasticsearch decided not to be open source anymore. So we are using OpenSearch from led by Amazon Web Services. But we need persistency, so we need a database. We GDPR ready. So then, okay, because we want to be GDPR ready, we need to have another database for identities. So basically, all the identities that we have in the tool are basically stored in this tool here called Sorting Hat. So Sorting Hat is the identities and affiliations management for any project or ecosystem that we analyze. So this is, again, because of this purpose that we have about taking care of developers, GDPR ready, and so on. This is forcing us to behave in a certain way. So then again, it's about having a specific tool, command line interface, GraphQL API that you can use in an isolated way to manage identities and affiliations. Okay, so this is how everything works. In terms of the data flow, as I mentioned, so we have this discussion about GDPR compliant. So then all data that flows from all the original data sources is stored here in terms of identities and affiliations, and then this is kind of enriching and producing new indexes. Okay. So if we go to the next one, these two places are basically where the raw indexes and the enriched indexes are taking place. So then there is a first flow coming into the raw index JSON file, if you remember from Percival, and then there is certain data transformation here that together with identities and other external data sources, then you are producing an index, a database that is way closer to what we are trying to analyze. For instance, if we want to analyze community or performance or activity, then these indexes here and these tables are way closer to the business of development analytics from the community manager perspective, from the OSPO open source program office perspective, from the inner source perspective, from the product lines perspective. So that depends on different things. So then, yes, so we have the JSON transformation, as I mentioned before. Then we have, sorting hat. We have the raw indexes going there. I basically strike through data model because this is supposed to be no SQL, so there are no data models, but this is not exactly true. There are data models, but this is what they say, no SQL people. Enrich index, we have specific data models here, and then we are visualizing information through a tool called Kibiter, which is a downstream version of OpenSearch, and then you can browse this. So it's basically a dashboard with different data sources. So you can go for one project, you can go to thousands of projects. Basically, you can that depends on your needs. GrimoireLab, just to give you some more context. So GrimoireLab is the open source tool. Then we have Bitergia Analytics. Am I going with time? Okay. Thank you. Just let me know if I have to just stop. So I stop. Customers or users are giving kind of a purpose as well, right? So we were thinking about purpose. We came from academia, so we had really specific needs to cover. Now with customers, they are giving different point of view or new point of view that are interesting here. So for instance, the first customers of GrimoireLab Bitergia Analytics were community managers. Okay, so they were explicitly interested in understanding companies and individuals and where they were working at and fixing basically or enabling them to contribute, right? So then because the first customers were community managers, this is framing GrimoireLab into a certain way. So we were basically putting a lot of effort in Sorting Hat, the tool to take care of identities and affiliations. Now, the second wave were mainly open source foundations. Okay, so now we need to scale, we need to make things bigger, and then, so we need to focus on scalability. And then, what is the purpose of open source foundations? The open source foundations, I assume OpenAtom is the same purpose. It's basically about adopting technology, basically gaining more and more adopters of the technology. And how you do it, basically by doing a lot of marketing, having great summits, as we are going to have this weekend. Basically, is a lot about understanding who is coming to the community, so then you can go to them and help them on board, and help them to bring money maybe, to be a paid member if possible. So that's part of the business of becoming an open source foundation, right? It's about growing the scalability of your members and enabling them to use effectively open source, including OpenEuler, OSS Compass, any other piece of software. And then the third wave of customers were corporations. So we realized in Bitergia, a bit late perhaps in our history, that money is not in open source foundations, it's in companies. Okay, so because of this, we said, well, probably we need to start moving into corporations at some point, because they have money, they don't have time. And what corporations were looking at specifically is, okay, we need way more task automation here, because there was certain manual effort. So we started to focus on automating many tasks, as well as having a consistent reporting, which is one of the things that GrimoireLab is providing here, basically consistent reporting. So it doesn't matter how many different ticketing systems you are using, you will have one view. So Jira, GitLab tickets, GitHub tickets, Git tickets, you have the same view. You can have in one place all aggregated. Okay, and then I wanted to bring these numbers here. So it's kind of the power of open source, right? So really quick, we started in early 2000s in LibreSoft. LibreSoft is a research group at the Universidad de Juan Carlos in Spain, where I started my career. In 2006, when I joined, we started Metrics Grimoire. It's one of the projects that we have there. This is SQL based and so on. And then we founded in 2012 Bitergia. Then GrimoireLab and Bitergia Analytics started as it is nowadays in 2015. CHAOSS was founded, and then this is 2023. And then in these years, we have all of these, let's say, versions of a software that is either forking the software or using GrimoireLab in somehow. So the highlight here is the following. It took us 12 years, basically, to produce research, right? It took us like 3 years to test the market, okay? And then basically, in 4 years, or in less than 4 years, maybe 1 year, couple of years, 3 years, all of these people were able, because this is open source, to use all of this research and experience and produce something out of the box in 1 year. So they didn't have to do research, they didn't have to do open source, because we already did it, right? So that's the beauty of open source, and that's something I wanted to highlight here, like, okay, this is what we can build together by having open source in place. This is, of course, a typo here that I fixed before, but it's not fixed here. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, moving forward. So Bitergia Analytics, what is this? It's important to remember that open source is not a business model. Okay, so just because you have an open source license, that doesn't mean that you are going to do business. This is just that you have an open source license. So what is the business model? Okay, so Bitergia Analytics is the commercial service, or one of the commercial services on GrimoireLab. And Bitergia Analytics, what it does is, okay, we take GrimoireLab, where we are, of course, the technical leaders in CHAOSS for this specific project, and then we provide services, including consultancy, deployment, installation, development, all of the usual steps. We provide training, and then we expose API data, and then we have a specific experience for OSS and inner source and product lines. So this is an example of how you can consume basically that information or that expertise. So basically in Bitergia, what we do is we use GrimoireLab as a tool for our data-driven service that we use to basically be in a better position than other companies to provide the consultancy that we are offering to our customers. And then GrimoireLab is one of the tools. Of course, we have all the research background. It's another one of the tools, basically knowledge and other things. So an example here is quite interesting. So the company was used to do a merchant acquisition process. So a big company came to us and said, hey, I want to buy this company, but I want to certify by someone that this company has this specific knowledge in open source. So basically we had to go to a specific open source project, analyze the different contributions and say, okay, this company A has this expertise, and certify that they have this expertise. Are we experts? Is Bitergia expert in merchant acquisition processes? We are not. But because we have the data skills, we can contextualize the data for this purpose. And that's another interesting fact, basically, because you have the data and you have the experience, you can start doing certain things here and there. Moving forward, so just some examples of Bitergia Analytics, how this has been used in the past, how to make the best of all the data we have. Good with time?
Yep.
Thank you. So Red Hat at CNCF. So Red Hat is a customer of Bitergia, and we are helping OpenShift. I guess that you all know OpenShift. OpenShift is a distribution of Kubernetes. To understand the community that they are part of. So 10 years ago, OpenShift was based on 200 developers. 200 is something that as a community manager we all can manage, right? So you can more or less know 200 people. You may know the names of maybe 50 of them, and then face recognition, most of them, right? The problem nowadays is that because OpenShift is a distribution of Kubernetes, then the size of the community suddenly is at the level of 7,000 developers. Okay, how can we do this as community manager? You need to scale, so you need a data-driven approach. And this is the example that we have here. So basically, what we have is all of the small pink dots are developers, and then there is a connection between the developer and a blue square if they basically produce something. So basically, this developer produces a commit here. And then we have developers, as for instance, these ones here, that are working in this project and this project. Okay. So what we can see here is the whole developers relationship in CNCF. This is from a couple of years ago. This was useful for Red Hat for 2 or 3 use cases. First one, to discover newcomers. okay, you are a newcomer, so then we can have a list of newcomers, and then I can go and say hello and welcome them and have a better and faster onboarding process. Good, perfect. Second, it's basically to enable relationships, because if there is a new developer joining Prometheus, for instance, and then we know that this developer is connected with other developers that we know perhaps through Red Hat, all this interaction is much faster, is much easier. So then that's another way the tool was used, this data-driven approach. And then you can see all the activity and the important people that are bridging the community. So there is a IEEE software paper in case you would like to have a look at it, but happy to discuss more later. More examples. So Santander Bank was a customer of Bitergia in the past for inner source, internal development. So in this case, this is another dashboard that you can produce based on metrics. Total different vertical. Instead of being IT, we are talking about banking. So we need to contextualize and think of metrics in a total different way. And then some other examples. Finance Foundation, which is banking and fintech sector with specific use cases. Telco ecosystem, and Uber, for instance, was another customer of Bitergia in the past. So each of them, they have their unique requirements or unique purposes in life as a company, right? And then we need to contextualize the data that GrimoireLab is able to gather into their needs, basically. So then each of them, they have different requirements, different needs. So this is how we are helping. And this is how GrimoireLab and CHAOSS specifically is helping to grow the understanding of health systems. And this is what we are trying to do with OpenEuler as well. Okay. Yes, so yeah, gathering data in this case is just having these projects, and this is kind of a final remark, because I'm going out of time. So if you remember the architecture, we have Perceval on the left, right? But that was the tool taking care of the API's access and giving you a JSON document. So then the beauty of open source as well is if you as a company, as an open source project is interested in supporting a new data source, then what you can have at some point is that you can develop this by yourself. But because this is part of a community called GrimoireLab and CHAOSS, you don't have to maintain this. So there is basically a business advantage. And being open source and upstream first is way more cheaper than doing this downstream and internally in a company. So this is kind of the highlight of this slide. The whole development cycle, nothing new on the table, you know, from idea on the very left to going to customer on the very right. So there are many places where you can go and pitch the pipeline and say, okay, what's going on? So GrimoireLab basically is taking care of all of this, or as well from CHAOSS. So you can go to any of them and say, what's going on in my code review process here? Are there inefficiencies? I'll go there, so you take it. Are there inefficiencies in my continuous integration stage? So you go there and analyze what's going on. It's about having data in all of these steps. Okay. So summary, then I'm done. The purpose is basically giving you the architecture. Customers are giving you the architecture as well. And then we have the community, which is really useful to basically bring back innovation, because the community, OpenEuler, will have specific ideas on how to use OpenEuler, right? So this is all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. So do we have any questions to Daniel and also to Chen?
Yep.
Do you make money?
Yes.
Bad business model, anyway.
So if you think about the business model, so we make money by having a subscription model with the dashboards, where we take care of all the deployment, maintenance, back upgrades, back fixing, any kind of problem with the platform. So you don't have to worry about that, and we'll do that faster, more reliable, and cheaper. So basically, if you think about how this works, then it's typically a good balance that you hire, in this case, Bitergia. That's part of from a tech perspective, what we do. Then, because we have all of this accumulated experience from the last 10 years in this industrial space, plus all the research, then basically we are bringing all this experience on the table, basically consultancy. And then by being part of CHAOSS and being part of the Inner Source Commons, it's basically another great way of having visibility and bringing those customers on the table for Bitergia. So it's basically consultancy, expertise, bringing the research branch that we have, or the research hat we have, that is interesting for some customers as well. So,
Okay,
we,
simple answer is yes.
yes, but I wanted to give, so yes, we do business. We are still alive, so
Okay.
11 years we are. More questions? Well, we'll be around, so any question or so, happy to chat with you and so on. So, thank you.
Actually, we got so many times or chances during the dinner time, so
Yes.
you are ready to drink, right? 对。是这样的，就是说那个 Shane and Daniel will go to the Peking University together with Professor Zhou to give a lecture to students in the next 2 hours. So after that, they will come back. So before that, we would like to give us the Chinese traditional show first, and then we will have a short break, and then continue our presentations and the keynote. Okay, thank you.